If you clicked on this video, chances are you think that invading Venezuela was American first, wasn't America first, or you're still kind of on the fence. Well, today I'm going to be breaking down why I strongly believe America shouldn't have seized Maduro, especially at the lives of 100 Venezuelans, and why the American people have no place supporting a man who doesn't support them at all. But before we do that, we're going to have to take a brief look into the history of this administration and the interactions with Venezuela, and especially their cartel known as Tren de Aragua. So back in January of last year, Trump signs an executive order that labels several foreign organizations and cartels to be now labeled as what we call foreign terrorist organizations. These are names that you've heard familiar with various organizations in the Middle East that we'll get into. But essentially, this happens and it occurs to be what is an excuse to actually go and attack these boats later on, which we'll talk about. One of these gangs that I'm sure you are familiar with is known as Tren de Aragua, which is a Venezuelan street gang that's been all over the news. But this raises a lot of eyebrows, ladies and gentlemen, because we have to understand that cartels simply do not meet the criteria for what we consider foreign terrorists. Foreign terrorists have shown to have ideological goals and even with a motive to influence policy. For example, we've seen this with the Taliban in Afghanistan with their motives to influence policy and inhibit women and prevent them from accessing education, to ISIS and their goals to being created post-Iraq to be able to actually implement laws that influence the entire country. So it's important to clarify that not only does this lead to logistical failures, because the way we handle addressing a cartel in a nation is very different than how we handle a foreign terrorist organization, it's important to understand why this was the case. Now, personally, I believe that this was used in an attempt to conflate the government with the cartel. Because the moment you associate Maduro with a Venezuelan street gang, you give yourself an excuse to impose Maduro as a threat rather than the street gang itself, which even then doesn't have any influence over policy change whatsoever. So the moment you label them as foreign terrorists, people who want these policy changes and people that actually want structural implementation, this is going to lead to being able to address Maduro as a corrupt politician, which yes, he is. He is a dictator who has influenced elections. There's substantial evidence to believe that. But when you can conflate the two so easily, you're kind of putting them in the same box. And once that's done, everything else in terms of being able to excuse kidnapping and seizing him becomes much easier in the eyes of Americans. But now that we've established that, we see that U.S. intelligence agencies themselves have disputed Trump's central claim that Maduro's administration was working with Tren de Aragua, the cartel group, and orchestrating drug trafficking and illegal immigration into the U.S., which is one of many things this admin ran on during the lead up to the attack. So fast forward to August, we send 3 guided missile destroyers, a navy of over 6,000 sailors, and Marines that have a variety of aircraft. Americans don't realize how much we mobilized, and that's wrong, because after all, those are our tax dollars. Insert Jewish music. Months after, Venezuelans die per each attack, in which dozens occur. And the admin is just stacking at this point, and the American people are still getting no proof of the apparent drugs that are on board at all, whether it's fentanyl, coke, or whatever bullshit the administration's coming up with this point. Because who knew calling them foreign terrorists was not enough to convince your people that you're actually doing something in the right cause. And we don't know whether it was a boat full of fentanyl or back to school supplies, or whether the people on the boat were most wanted cartels of the Eon or just sailors whose families were held at gunpoint. Regardless, it was without trial. Trump describes these big bags of drugs being spattered all over the ocean, but the American people still get no proof, neither from the military or the White House. More people are starting to question this admin and whether it actually knows what it's doing. And you actually have former officials come out and say that this is the most ambiguous administration they've witnessed in their careers in its entire capacity. And you even have former officials come out and say that this is the most former officials that come out and even say that this is the most ambiguous administration that they've ever seen in their tenure. And you may think, well, it's good for the Americans because any money is good money that goes into our pockets, right? Well, sure, yeah, you think that having money in your pocket means something good's happening, but that's not even the case. I mean, Americans aren't getting this money. We have to understand this. They aren't benefiting from this armed conflict. It's important to distinguish that from a war. But it's just another favor of Trump to his billionaire donors who are cashing in because of their troubles holding on to Venezuela's natural resources. This isn't for you. It's just something you have to understand. This isn't for you, and it never was for you. And if you still don't care, chances are you may think that the US should have no care about international law. I mean, what place do we have when the ICC has no jurisdiction on issuing us arrest warrants? I mean, we're the USA, right? Understand, ladies and gentlemen, that is where our pride lies at. We as the US take pride in being the bringer of justice, the people who inspire democracy to the world, and that's irregardless to our past mistakes. Because the moment we break a barrier we helped establish, it says more about us than it does anyone else. So this attempt to hijack this colonialist idea and label it American and then label anyone else as anti-American is just, it's ridiculous, right? I mean, it is more American to say that we need to be bringers of justice rather than people who resort to colonial efforts that we helped stop. Okay, well, now that we've established the fear-mongering, the ambiguous nature, the brazen act of seizing another leader in the name of democracy, hurting our legacy and what we've truly deemed as democracy, we understand. We've seen this happen before, ladies and gentlemen. Acts in the name of regime change. We saw Wolfowitz, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Pearl, all of the war hawks of their time advocate for these kinds of regime changes. And we see it now in dumbasses like Rubio who think they know something about foreign countries just because they're part Cuban, or Hegseth, who at least is living up to the even stupider name of his department. People like Darren Woods and Ryan Lance and all these other hogs and billionaires that are cashing in their benefits to this admin in the first place. And we didn't see money in the pockets of Americans when the CPA controlled Iraqi oil in the post-invasion. We didn't see money in the pockets of Americans when Libyan assets were under our control post-Gaddafi. And we certainly won't see that money in the pockets of Americans now. And even if there is a chance, there isn't. Let me explain. So according to The Guardian, the US intends to control the oil exports while indefinitely selling that same oil in the global market. Now you may think, yeah, this is a great return and an investment for the US economy, but other reports show that the immediate profits that we're going to be gaining, or that was gained in the invasion, are going to accounts not even affiliated with the country. Now you may be thinking, what does that even mean? Well, it's just a fancy way of saying offshore accounts. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. These assets seized by the US government are now stashed away in an account only accessible by the Treasury, and essentially money that you're never going to see again. Which, I mean, to be fair, you never saw it in the first place. You're not going to see those funds, is what I'm basically trying to say. Not you, your neighbor. Their production is not even on par, ladies and gentlemen. You see, Venezuela's oil infrastructure is degraded. It's not a sitting pot of gold that a lot of Americans, or some, may imagine when they see this opportunity that the US is taking, because that's just not the case at all. You see, Venezuela's oil has these refineries, it has these pipelines, and all the good stuff that's gonna need a lot of money to get back up again. And we're talking about billions and billions of dollars of reinvestment, something that the US has to put forward before we even start extracting this oil. And even then, CEOs of these mega corporations, like Mr. Woods, for example, of ExxonMobil, says that it's uninvestable. Like, honestly, what are we doing here? And with the money we do make, yeah, it's not going to be funneled into the US economy either. Yeah, newsflash. Years and years worth of arbitration cases on Venezuela, that's where the money's going. Because we have to understand, someone's going to have to pay those agencies up front as a result of these cases that have just stacked over Maduro's tenure. It's time we wake up and realize, for the 124th, Kaloki made that number up, or whatever number time, that this is not our fight, nor our money, unless we're talking about what's being used to fund this. Wake up, Americans, because it is time we stand for what is right, and most importantly, what is American.